Good afternoon. I'm David Strickland. I'm head of the Butler Center for Arkansas Studies, and I'd like to welcome you to this month's Legacies and Lunch. So if you're here for the first time, welcome. If you're not here for the first time, welcome too. Please turn off your cell phones and any other noise-making instruments you might have brought with you, kazoos or any accordions you might have on your person. We don't want to interfere with the soundtrack of the filming we're doing today. And this series is part of our ongoing series we've had for many years. It's sponsored by the Arkansas Humanities Council. Thank those fine folks for helping us with that. I'd like to invite you also to come across the street to the Arkansas Studies Institute building where the Butler Center is headquartered and do research on the Civil War or many other topics. If you'd like to do that, we can help you. I just figure if we can't help you learn something, you don't need to know it. So just come over there and they'll help you out. This is a great event for us. Mark Christ is our speaker today, and Mark, you may know him if you listen to KOAR. You hear him on the radio a lot. He does those very nice spots of this day or around this time of Arkansas Civil War history for the sesquicentennial 150th anniversary of the war. He is a native of Indiana. We were just talking about this. He grew up in Fort Wayne, Indiana, which is named for Mad Anthony Wayne, a great military figure of days gone by. But he's been in Arkansas since 1976. Went to University of Arkansas Little Rock. Was undergraduate work, graduate work at the Oklahoma University of Oklahoma. And he is with the Department of Arkansas Heritage and works in their Historic Preservation Office and also does the sesquicentennial work for the Civil War, a commemoration that we're in the middle of. And he also is currently the board chair of the Arkansas Humanities Council. A lot of notorious characters have had that distinction in the past. I won't mention some of those people there in this room. But we're proud of that connection for many reasons, one of which is that the AHC is in the building across the street where you can come do your research. But please join me in welcoming Mark Christ. He'll be available to sign his new book that the Butler Center Books Division has published, and he will be talking about that. You can buy that after the talk today. He'll sign it. He'll inscribe it to somebody if you wish. And he also will be available for questions after his formal remarks are ended, and then we'll just have a good time. And please join me in welcoming Mark Christ.
Thank you all for coming. Before I get started on Jacob, I want to make sure everyone knows that another event that the Central Arkansas Library System is hosting, along with the Sesquicentennial Commission, this Sunday, the 11th, we're going to do a debut showing of War in the 60s, which is a documentary film that the late Jack Hill started on the Civil War in Arkansas. Jack passed away last year, but Dale Carpenter from UA Fayetteville finished up the film from Jack's notes, and we'll be getting together at 1:30 on Sunday at the Ron Robinson Theater right across the parking lot here to debut that film and talk some about that. So pass the word on that to your friends if you want to. But today we are here to talk about a remarkable document, the diary of Jacob Haas. On Saturday, August 21, 2010, I got an email from a guy named Michael Wilson, who's the athletic director at a school in Broomfield, Colorado. And in that email he wrote, "I have been blessed with the possession of diaries of my great-great-grandfather, Jacob Haas, who fought as a young German-speaking immigrant in Company A, 9th Regiment of Wisconsin Volunteer Infantry. I have treasured these since I was a boy, and with the sesquicentennial of the war, I thought they may be of interest to share. If there is interest in seeing and reading these items, please contact me. They are heirlooms in my family, and I believe historically important." Well, after I cleaned the drool from my chin after getting that email, I gave Mike a call. And we visited some. He sent me the transcript of the translation. The original diary was written in German, And in this document, I found one of the best first-person accounts of the war, not just in Arkansas, but in the entire Trans-Mississippi region that I've ever seen. Haas and his comrades served in Kansas, the Indian Territory, Missouri, and Arkansas, and walked pretty much everywhere they went, hence the title, This Day We Marched Again. Mike gave me permission to annotate Jacob's diary, and that is now this book. Jacob Haas was a good observer of the places he marched and the events he witnessed. And he was sometimes funny, sometimes poetic, and always interesting. Jacob Haas was born in 1840 in Württemberg, Germany. He emigrated to Wisconsin with his family sometime between 1850 and 1860. That's the first time he shows up in the census. And when war came in 1861, Sheboygan County men answered the call to arms. Jacob lived in Sheboygan County. One Wisconsin history wrote that Lincoln's call to arms was answered by the German, the Scandinavian, the Irishman, and the native-born American without any distinction or hesitancy. And that kind of international conglomeration is what we'll see in the 9th Wisconsin. Sheboygan County provided a total of 2,515 soldiers to U.S. service, of which only 479 were drafted. That's probably more than half of the county's eligible population for service. Haas enlisted on September 17, 1861 in the Sheboygan Tigers, which would become Company A of the 9th Wisconsin Infantry Regiment. Served under Colonel Frederick Salomon, a name that's very important in Arkansas Civil War history. And Salomon's brother would later become governor of Wisconsin. At this point, Edward Salomon was the lieutenant governor of Wisconsin, and there's some talk that he was elected to that, or placed in that position, to help the other guy win the governorship. But the other guy fell in the river and drowned, and Edward became governor, which served his brothers quite well in their service. Jacob wrote of the early days in camp. They were in Camp Siegel on the shores of Lake Michigan. It was really, really cold. But he wrote, days went by drearily, and some of the boys slipped by the guards and went into town. Some were caught, but not much was done in the way of punishment, except that they were put in the guardhouse. December and January came, and we were still camping in cold and deep snow on the shores of Lake Michigan in Camp Siegel in biting winds. And that's kind of the region I grew up in. This was not ideal camping situations. But they left there on January 22, 1862, took a boat down the Mississippi and then a train across Missouri. This is one of the few times in their service that they would be able to enjoy such conveyances. They went to Leavenworth, Kansas, and then marched to Fort Scott, Kansas, where Jacob wrote, "At last, on the 8th day of our march, we came to Fort Scott. Just when we went up the hill into town, the wind blew so hard that we could hardly stand on our feet, and dust flew like smoke. It filled our eyes and noses. We could hardly see anything on best we could without looking about. On the south side of town, on an open place near Spring Creek, we rested, and then made camp without delay, for a heavy thunderstorm came up. We had marched 140 miles. And there's frequently he will talk about the distances they had marched and the many, many marches that he went through. On May 16, they were ordered to Indian Territory. This was the first federal invasion of the Indian Territory. And this saw a lot of marching and little action. Here's a typical day for the 9th. He wrote on June 3, 1862, "Today we crossed a 26-mile stretch of beautiful prairie. Many colored flowers cover the ground. It was beautiful, but even beauty in the long run becomes monotonous." This expedition was led by Colonel William Weir. He was a pre-war Kansas lawyer and a notorious drunkard. He led them on a meandering, seemingly pointless march throughout Indian Territory with temperatures going well over 118 degrees and very little water. On July 8th, Jacob wrote, "We marched and camp was made in a bleak hill near woods. The heat was intense and springs were dry. Only one spring could be found for the entire army, but even this was all red and really unfit to drink. Even then, too many thirsty crowded around it, and it was almost impossible to get to the water. Many were glad to suck wet sand. Well, we ended up going into his tent and going on a week-long bender, and on July 18, Frederick Solomon, saying that his grossly intemperate habits, long continued, had produced idiocy or monomania, arrested Weir, took command, and brought the troops back to Kansas. They then went under the command of General James Blunt, who we see here. The 9th was involved in the First Battle of Newtonia, Missouri, in late fall 1862, in which 4 companies of the 9th were just cut to pieces. Company A was not among them. They came to Arkansas in mid-October, and well, here's a typical day of that march. On October 25, Jacob wrote, "This day we marched again. Fine apple orchards are around, but they have suffered by frost. Rocky hills and deep valleys make beautiful panorama. Our Company A was in the advance. Soon intelligence came that our cavalry in the lead had been fired on from a mill. The perpetrators escaped, but the mill was stormed and burned." And guerrillas were a constant danger for the Union Army in this area, in this period. On November 3rd, he wrote, "We proceeded about 4 miles from Bentonville and camped on a farm. Camp Bonnet it was called. A young artillery lieutenant of the 2nd Indiana was careless enough to get into a love affair with a young lady and was encouraged. He went to see her all alone but carried his arms. One day the young lady took his sword and revolver. Upon signal of her mother, about a half-dozen guerrillas stormed into the house, caught the unarmed lieutenant and took him out, tortured him in the most barbaric manner, and buried him under dry leaves, where his comrades found him. When he did not return, his comrades, suspecting evil, investigated and found the corpse. The home of the girl with all the belongings were burned in retaliation. What became of the 2 women, I've never learned." The 9th was not involved in the Battle of Cane Hill on November 27th, and was actually guarding the wagon train at Ray's Mill during the horrific December 27, 1862 Battle of Prairie Grove. But they did come onto the battlefield afterward, at which time Jacob observed, "On the battlefield stood a house in which women and children were in the cellar during the battle. The battle over, the women came out and found the husband, brother, and brother-in-law among the dead. Her grief was terrible. She blamed only us for the war. Soon after, her house was burned with all that was in it. She had nothing left." Later that month, toward the end of December, the Army of the Frontier marched from Cane Hill to Van Buren, where the Confederates had retreated after the Battle of Prairie Grove, in an effort to just kind of knock the rebel army out while they could. And it was really a pretty terrible march. If you've ever driven through the Boston Mountains, imagine walking that. And they did. Jacob wrote, "Roads became impassable, and we had to take the creek bed going in cold and deep water. 23 times we had gone through the water, and there seemed to be no end. Night came, and we made camp on a small farm. The rails served for thousands of campfires. What a vision that was. Next day, the wading through the creek began again, knee-deep and later deeper. 13 times we had been so far today. Now 2 rivers meet up, and we have to go in again. It was deep. It was so deep, the current was so strong that we could hardly keep our feet. It was the last crossing, but it was 37 times in 36 hours. Well, once they got into Van Buren, they did what armies are known to do. They kind of took what they wanted from the local places. And Jacob took part in some of this looting. He wrote that, "Slowly we moved on, and by night came to town. Each took care of himself best he could. Next morning, camp was chosen and the town inspected. I had just gone into a large store. Many others were in, and plenty of sugar there. We took some. We saw General Blunt enter, gun in hand. The men fled. The general closed and locked the door." This was also one of the first times that Jacob observed African Americans being held in slavery. And he wrote, "A troop of Negroes was found locked up in a barn and anxiously peering at us through the cracks. They told us their masters had locked them up and told them to be very quiet. They were told the Yankees would kill them if they would find them. We set them at liberty, and for joy they jumped like crickets. Afterwards they went with us. Well, for the next 6 months, the 9th Wisconsin basically marched apparently aimlessly through the Ozark Mountains of southwest Missouri and northwest Arkansas. And a lot of their travel was through extremely remote areas and on barely non-existent roads, as on March 23 of 63. We proceeded and again crossed mountains, and twice we crossed the James River. Here the river was not so deep, and all crossed on cavalry horses. Horses balked, objecting to carry two. One horse, 2 men on it, got into deep water and turned over, but all came out except one gun which remained in the river. This wilderness is little inhabited, only a recluse here and there. After a march of about 14 miles, we came to a deep rocky ravine with high walls around. Here was a house with many women in it. They were much frightened and at the same time surprised and interested over such company. They thought they could never be found here and had never seen so many men together. They also spent some time in northwest Arkansas in March and April, including some time spent at Carrollton, which was the original county seat of Carroll County. Jacob wrote, "We went forward over rolling country and came to Berryville, a very small town. We camped on an open field and went on next day and came to Carrollton, a good-sized town. Surrounded densely with young oak timber, it was so dense that sometimes you could hardly see 10 feet ahead. We camped near town on open field. After we had camped here for several days, at different times, guns were fired from dense woods at some of our soldiers, and one was wounded. This caused great irritation among the men. Several companies of cavalry were sent out with orders to burn every house in the community. Orders were carried out quite promptly, and some of the suspected people were shot." April 6, he wrote, "We left Carrollton, and much of the city was burned in reprisal of the deeds of bushwhackers." Well, on July 8th, the 9th Wisconsin was sent to garrison duty in St. Louis. I had the luxury of taking a train there from Rolla. But St. Louis was not the best duty post, as Jacob observed. He wrote, "The nights brought much diversion because of the great multitude of unusually large rats. They were almost countless in number and so annoying that they ran over our feet. They were in every house and even upon the roofs. At night on the sidewalks they would run under your feet and squeak all around you. When on guard duty we would throw wood and stones at them, even use the bayonet. If you scared off one, 2 or a half dozen would be behind you or between your feet. It was aggravating and highly irritating." Well, they left Rat Town fairly soon after that. Went to in September. They transferred to Arkansas. They took a boat to Helena, and then to Duval's Bluff, and then marched to Little Rock from Duval's Bluff. And battle was not the only danger. Battling guerrillas was not the only danger they fought. The 9th was on a mission, just camped out near a creek somewhere in Pulaski County. And Jake wrote, "Soon we had our dinner on the fire, cooking promisingly. A strong wind was blowing. Some of us became concerned because of the dead trees hanging over us. But dinner was ready, and we took it to our tents. Then a crash, a cry, a great limb of a giant tree crashed into a tent. The men jumped out, but the last one was struck and killed instantly. The blood ran over his face. Friedrich Rossman was dead. Another man was scratched, but not seriously hurt. The dead man was washed, a coffin was made best we could, and next day the corpse was sent to Little Rock, where a brother was among the remaining soldiers. He was buried with soldiers' honors on the soldiers' cemetery. Then all our tents were moved from under the trees to an open space. And Friedrich Rossman is buried in Little Rock National Cemetery today." Well, Jacob and the 9th took part in the Camden expedition in April of 1864. In fact, the Camden expedition ended 150 years ago last Saturday. And fully a third of this manuscript covers that campaign, and it includes one of the best descriptions of a soldier's camp while in the field that I've come across. Jake wrote in late March, "We entered Benton and went down a hill to a clearing, and in the bordering timber made bivouac, for we had no tents. Necessity is the mother of wisdom. Rain has fallen, and it is raining still. 2 soldiers chummed together. Out came the pocket knife. We cut 2 forked sticks. For up we put them into the ground about 7 feet apart. Now a pole over the stick, and then 2 rolls of oilcloth over the pole, and the sides fastened to the ground. Now brush and leaves on the ground inside. That gives room in bed for 2. From the gable end we crawl in, lie down, and sleep. That is a soldier's bivouac. If rain is very copious, then fence rails go below the brush and grass over the rails. Then the water can flow below. We go in and out on all 4. In good weather, the oilcloth is put on the ground, we stretch out on it and cover it with our woolen blanket. Then all is well. Over us is the great blue tent, and the stars are our candle. Well, the 9th Wisconsin was part of the 2nd Brigade of Major General Frederick Steele's 7th Army Corps. And they were marching south in the Camden expedition to join another army at Shreveport, Louisiana, with the goal of invading eastern Texas and flying the Stars and Stripes over Texas, while also getting a lot of cotton back to the cotton mills in the northeastern U.S., which had been lying idle since the war began. Haas and his comrades were part of the escort for Steele's supply train and fought throughout the day on April 2, 1864, losing 1 man wounded and 11 missing before driving away their attackers. But the day did end well for them. Jacob wrote, "Here close to our camp near the house was a large pile of ashes. Some of our men did not trust that pile, inspected and found in it a barrel full of the finest of ham. All was divided under the greatest merriment. The lady of the house came and gave a sharp tongue lashing to the king-scented Yankees, who spy everything. Laughter and derision was all she received." Haas and the 9th Wisconsin next saw battle 2 days later at the crossing of the Little Missouri River at Elkins Ferry, right where you cross the Little Missouri from Clark into modern Nevada County. He wrote that when our men went to meet them, the rebels retired, and ours after them, until they perceived that the rebels fell back only to have others of their force cut them off. Then ours retired, and the rebels again attacked and drove them to the bank of the river. We now plainly heard heavy musket firing mingles with the roar of cannon. By this time, the 29th Iowa had crossed the river to aid them, and now we and our battery went over in the midst of a rain of rebel bullets. Cannon now roared from both sides. When we followed the roar of our cannon, our brave General Rice met us and gave welcome in the words, "We will send these traitors to hell before we leave this place." But we were stunned when we saw blood run down both sides of his face and saw pain in his features. When we expressed our sympathy, he only said, "It is a pity because of my cap, because it cost me $5 and it is entirely torn." A piece of shell had torn the cap and wounded him in the head. It came close to take his life. Following, after the Union got the bridgehead across the Little Missouri, they went to Prairie du Anne, which basically, if you've ever driven down Interstate 30, Prairie du Anne, the prairie and the battlefield are between the 2 Prescott exits. Very pristine battlefield to this day. They skirmished for several days, and Jacob offers a description of some of that fighting. We came close to the timber on the opposite side of the prairie. Here halt was made, and the cannon began to growl. The rebels, too, began to throw their bombs and shells, but they did not seem to hit. One of our batteries pounded the rebels before and behind the home. Here we remained, lying in the grass until darkness fell upon us. Sharpshooters kept up the fire. From shelter, often sharp epithets were thrown across. The rebels offered us coffee and we them sauerkraut if they would come and get it. Distance was not too great. All we had to eat was half a ration of crackers. Fire was not allowed. Well, on April 15th, Steele abandoned his march toward Shreveport and turned instead toward Camden on the Ouachita River in the hopes that he would find some food. His army was pretty much starving at this point. And the 9th Wisconsin was part of his rear guard and fought up the enemy pursuers on April 15th at Poison Spring, which would become a much more famous battlefield a few days later. But this was a sharp little fight here. He wrote, "Soon we came to the Little Washington Road. Here we found many earmarks of nearness of rebels. We were just climbing up a hill when our howitzers again lifted up their voices. Soon the large cannon joined in the song. We were ordered into battle line and marched in the brush behind the large cannon, which in great haste spat shells against the rebels. We marched upward. Enemy shells shrieked and exploded about us. Dirt rained upon us, mingled with steel and howling sounds in the air. We tried to protect ourselves behind trees and in any way possible. From here we could see the work of our artillery, how they hurried in, loading, firing, and resetting their guns. Shells shrieked and exploded between us and our artillery, throwing up dirt into the air, and others tore down trees. It was a spectacle of hell let loose. But they did make it to Camden, and the Union Army, basically the Army had left Little Rock on half rations and gotten lower and lower on food since then. And they were pretty desperate when they were in Camden. They were regularly sending out foraging expeditions looking for food, and one of those involved Jacob in this expedition. He wrote, "At 11 o'clock, we in Company B were ordered across the river after provisions. After a march of about 8 miles, we came to a large farm. With the aid of Negroes, we found bacon in ham, plenty of it hidden under cotton, plus molasses and lard. The garden lost onions, and the hennery its chicken. The slaves greeted us with joy. We were the first Yankees they saw. We departed in peace." But food remained scarce, and after 2 Union supply trains were taken and their escorts destroyed at Poison Spring and Mark's Mills, Steele elected to cut his losses and head back to Little Rock while he still had an army to save. The pursuing Confederates caught up to the Union force in the Saline River bottoms on the evening of April 29, and this was not the best place for the Yankee army to stop. Jacob describes this camp. "We heard a few cannon shots but marched on toward the river Saline. The river was deep and pontoon bridges had to be built. The entire night we had heavy rain and thunderstorms. Roads were terrible and we had to stop in the morass. Boom, boom, suddenly the cannon barked behind us. Fear and trembling was upon the faces of the white people, and more so upon the faces of the slaves who fled with us. We were in the morass and the enemy upon us. We muddled on until we were in the deepest mud and water and close to the swollen Saline River. We made bivouac on a small farm. With darkness, the cannonade ceased. We had to wait until, under great difficulty, the pioneers made a bridge across the river. Then our large train, artillery, and all they could walk and crawl across the river. Rain had been and was still pouring continually. We had slept a little lying on fence rails. We had nothing to eat and had marched 21 miles. And if anyone's seen the movie Lincoln, the first scene in Lincoln depicts the fighting at Jenkins Ferry, and while the action might not be completely accurate, the conditions are very right. It was just a miserable place to fight. And on April 30, 1864, Jacob, Haas, and the 9th Wisconsin fought their greatest battle, protecting Steele's armies across the Saline River at Jenkins Ferry. And he gives an extensive account of the battle. Here's a small part of the action. The 29th Iowa Regiment had gone into the timber and was firing. By this time, bullets whizzed around us. Our entire brigade soon was in line and under increasing fire. The rebels came closer. Now they were in strong numbers in the small clearing and came closer every second. The rolling of the guns sounded like a continuous thunderstorm. Continual hissing and shrieking of thousands of bullets. The 29th Iowa began to waver and to retreat before the superior forces of the rebels. Then appeared our General Rice and ordered us into the fray. With zest and hurrah, guns in hand, we broke through the other regiment to meet the rebels in the open field. Terrible was the gunfire as we turned upon the surprised rebels. This they had not expected. They were sure of victory. Now they ran under terrible losses. Our bullets trimmed their lines and the rest fled in confusion. When they had been repulsed, we were ordered back to the edge of the woods. Well, in the end, the rebels were repulsed at the Battle of Jenkins Ferry, and Steele's men managed to cross the river. They destroyed their pontoon bridge behind them and began a miserable 2-day march through thick mud with no food back to Little Rock. Then on 2 days, Jacob wrote, "It was nearly night when suddenly a rush came into camp. All the lame and discouraged ran in one direction as if they were new men. Hurrah! Crackers! Plenty crackers! Now we get hurrah!" It came from all directions. Several loads of crackers had arrived from Little Rock. In the greatest hurry, they were unloaded and distributed. Joy everywhere, and then sweet sleep. And it's hard to imagine anybody getting that excited about hardtack. That just tells you how hungry these guys were. Well, on the 3rd, they marched into Little Rock, and Jacob wrote, "This morning all formed orderly, our company ahead. Then came a company of Negroes with the captured cannon and flags. Then came the 1st Brigade, and so the entire army. Soon we came to a little hill from which we can overlook the city. Here we waited until all had arrived, and then, between thousands of happy faces and music, we marched into the city and entered our well-known camp with tent houses. Now we could eat and drink, and then rested from the great 276-mile expedition. Well, Haas survived the Camden expedition, but then faced the greatest enemy of any Civil War soldier, disease, which caught up to him in August of 1864. He wrote, "Sickness is beginning to encroach into our regiment and even into the entire army. It is called scurvy. The symptoms are red, blue, and even green blotches on the body, mostly on the lower limbs and the gums. On some the legs are swollen and blue, green, and black. The gums turning black and sponge-like. Under least pressure, blood oozes out and the gums fall off as if rotten. Many unfit for service and must be sent home." Well, sorry, it was just before lunch on that. But Jacob was among the soldiers who was sent home suffering from an extreme case of scurvy. And while he was on the boat back to Wisconsin, he saw something that was kind of remarkable. He wrote, "A while after we were on board came the rumor that two women were among the soldiers dressed as men. Everybody went on deck to see them. I too was keenly interested and went. There, in the midst of a group of soldiers, sat a very young and beautiful soldier, who in manner, voice, and carriage had nothing of the man soldier, and now was discovered as not belonging here. Upon inquiry, she stated that she had served 18 months as a soldier. She received rich presents from soldiers and civil travelers. Her hair was shorn short, and in soldier's uniform and assuming right manners, she had not been detected. Now let us look at the other one at the rear of the ship. She was telling fortunes from cards. She was rather old for a soldier and had too much bust for a man and could not hide it. The fine line of the face, too, were a telltale, nor could she hide it in her voice. She had served 2 years in a cavalry regiment and had been wounded in one hand. Next came time for battle. She refused to go in and revealed her identity. She was dismissed from service, was brought to the boat under escort to be sent home to Missouri. The escort gave away the secret. The first one was very much mine to re-enlist. Jacob Haas returned to civilian life, working as a carpenter. He married a woman named Emily Goering in 1865. And Emily would die from complications of childbirth on February 27, 1873, and their infant daughter died 1 week later. Jacob then married Augusta Johanna Setti 5 months later. This is Jacob and Augusta. They would raise 4 daughters and a son. They would settle in Corder, Missouri, in the heart of the country where Jacob had campaigned 25 years earlier. And he never got over the effects of the war. The old soldier suffered from the effects of scurvy, and the years of marching and camping under the stars left him with crippling rheumatism. He died on September 12, 1906, proud of his service for his adopted country, and leaving behind a remarkable memoir of one soldier's experiences in the Trans-Mississippi. Any questions?
The process of keeping a journal and fighting, I mean, that logistically that must be tough sometimes. I mean, no light tools for taking down notes. Any indication of how he did it or how others did it?
Well, in the case of Jacob, I believe that what he did was he took notes where he could, and I think that after the war, he compiled his various notes into this document here. There are some instances where you can tell that he had probably gone in and said this is what happened. But it really is with all of these kind of soldier diaries, it's kind of amazing. Some guys were motivated to the point that they would sit down and do daily entries. Sometimes during a battle they'll write something down. They didn't have Facebook, so I guess they just did what they could with what they had. But we're very lucky that we have so many great accounts left by those soldiers. Yes, sir.
At any time in your reading of Mr. Haas's diary, did he mention if the slaves knew of the Emancipation Proclamation?
There's no mention, and Jake makes no mention of that. However, he does indicate that the times that they do run into slaves, the slaves often, if not always, would leave and follow the army back to the safety of their camps, or relative safety. Some of the folks that followed the army at Poison Spring and Marks Mills were killed, and some of these guys at Jenkins Ferry didn't make it either. But the Emancipation Proclamation itself, he doesn't mention at all. He does though write quite a bit. In the Camden expedition, Steele's army came down from Little Rock, but a second column of about 3,600 troops came from Fort Smith as well, and that included the 1st and 2nd Kansas Colored Infantry Regiments, both of which were heavily involved in fighting during the Camden expedition. And he writes about them and actually, quite glowingly of their conduct as soldiers. Yes, sir.
I have quite a few pioneers in Indiana in my family. And I really thought I was a true Southerner, but I have quite a few Union soldiers. I have one that fought for both sides. Pardon me, who was your favorite author on the Union soldiers besides yourself? On the Union side.
On the Union, well, probably Bruce Catton. Just as far as general Union, he really caught the spirit of the Army of the Potomac. But my particular interest is in the Trans-Mississippi, and in that case, I would probably go with Greg Irwin in the Trans-Mississippi.
Thanks.
Yes, sir.
There were a lot of Germans who were fighting, apparently in Arkansas. I have a distant relative, obviously, who was in Franz Siegel's unit. Did these units that were German speaking, communicate with each other in some way?
Well, if they encountered each other, if there were individuals who knew each other, they might well have written back and forth. But I don't think there was a regular communication back and forth. Jacob does, whenever they ran into another Wisconsin unit, he made a big deal about that, and a lot of those units would have included German soldiers. In fact, when the 9th was recruited, they were supposed to go to Franz Sigel, but they ended up being sent to a different command. And one interesting thing, when they were in St. Louis, initially the 9th were the provost guards for the city. Then they were put on other duty, and the 1st Nebraska Cavalry arrived. And the 1st Nebraska was a group that had quite a few Germans in it. And Jacob writes how when the 1st Nebraska showed up, they were kind of seedy looking, and these guys in the 9th made fun of them and stuff. And then the 1st Nebraska became the provost guards and started arresting guys from the 9th in bars and things. And it became very close to becoming physical violence, and that's the point that the 9th was sent to Arkansas. Whether because of that or not, but it's just kind of so there wasn't all peace and love between the various German soldiers. Yes, sir.
He mentions various commanding people. Is there ever any reference to Colonel Whipple in his notes in Wisconsin?
I don't believe so.
Who was later mayor of Little Rock.
No, I don't believe so. That's interesting.
Colonel Whipple married a woman who wrote the note that led to the hanging of David Dodd.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and he must. I'm assuming he was with a different regiment. There were several Wisconsin units that served in Arkansas. Yes, ma'am.
Have you traced it? Have you walked where he walked? And have you tried to?
Well, I've got a pretty good handle on the Camden expedition, but I wouldn't imagine trying to do what he did up in the Ozarks. I think some of those areas that they marched through are probably pretty much inaccessible still today. But they literally marched thousands and thousands of miles. That's one of the things that just struck me about this. And people go out hiking for fun today. I'd like to see him go up against these guys in the night.
You mentioned coming in contact with contrails, the guerrillas in the Missouri.
Not Quantrill directly, but they did, and they dealt with guerrillas a lot, and in Arkansas and Missouri Ozarks. That was really their primary foe during those operations. Yeah. And there's I didn't bring any of it out here, but there's when they were in the Indian Territory, he had some really interesting observations of the Indians that they met, which was to a guy off the boat from Germany was very exotic.
Were the guerrillas more southern or northern sympathizers or both?
The ones he ran into were southern sympathizers. That's the ones they fought. If there were Unionists, they would have just gotten along fine. Yes, sir.
It sounded as if most of the time these men were living off the land, or whatever they could steal, or whatever. Where did they get the shoes?
Well, they would be issued shoes. That's one thing he doesn't get into, at length, is matters of clothing. So I'm guessing that at least at the start of these expeditions, they walked out, with decently clad and things like that. But you do have to wonder, the government contract shoes, cheap, lowest bidder, even then. I do know that this wasn't Jacob's guys, but part of the Union Army, Prairie Grove, that did a forced march from Springfield, Missouri to Prairie Grove, and they marched there in 3 days and went into pitched battle. But after a day on the march, a lot of those guys had taken their shoes off and hung them over their shoulders, and found it more comfortable to walk barefoot over these flint rock roads in freezing weather than wearing the shoes they were issued. Any other questions? Yes.
One more. One of mine that's out of Indiana. She was my great aunt, and she married a Union soldier that fought with Sherman.
Mm-hmm.
And she was one of the first white ladies in Washington State that did the Oregon Trail. So, and I have a lot on her, but I'm still missing. Her dad was supposed to have been a captain in the Union Army, and I can't find him. Any clue on how?
I would say go to the Butler Center and talk to Ron.
I've been there.
The total number of northern troops who came in, what would have been the total number? You have any idea? Hundreds, thousands?
Tens of thousands over the course of the war, and different numbers at different times. It's like the army that fought here in the Union Army that was in Arkansas in 1862. A lot of those guys were not here in 1863. They went on and fought on the other side of the river. So it fluctuated between times, between what was going on. After the Camden expedition, there were not a huge number, just enough to hold the line of the Arkansas River and to go out and hunt guerrillas. Well, the major military activity, big armies took place on the other side of the river.
Mark, can you talk a bit about your work with the Sesquicentennial Commission? And also, if you have any way of comparing what other states, if they've done as much as Arkansas has done, or similar, or okay.
Well, Arkansas has done very well, I think, compared to other states, especially states surrounding us, to commemorate the Sesquicentennial. We have several commission-generated programs that we sanction events. We have a historical marker program that so far has markers in 51 Arkansas counties. We're looking to get the other 24 covered before we cease to exist on December 31 of 2015. We have a traveling exhibit that we distribute through the Humanities Council that is scheduled in 2016. It's been very popular. We have a passport program that brings people to places all over the state to see the places where the Civil War was fought in Arkansas. And we also have a grant program. We've helped to finance activities and events all over the state. And so I would put us in the top 25% of if I'd probably put us in the top 5, frankly. But I can't quantify that, so I'll hold back a little bit. Yes.
Mark, can you tell us what will be your next book?
I am currently between projects. This is the first time in about 10 years that I haven't had a book in some stage of production, so I'm taking the rest. But if I do another one, it's going to be the rest of the war. My magnum opus was covered in 1863, and no one's really done the Camden expedition to the end. So if I can force myself to do it, that'll be the next project. Yes, sir.
Mark, evidence has emerged recently that there was a nest of these traitorous bushwhackers located near Wilford. And I wondered if you had any evidence from Haas about those activities.
Well, that entire region, the whole Williford, Imboden metroplex was infested with guerrillas throughout.
They still are.
They still are, frantic. Yeah, you recently saw some of them on Hillbilly Feud or whatever that show was. So they just try to contain them and not. Thank you. I was wondering if such a question would arise. Any other questions?
Any serious questions?
Yeah, that's a good one to end it on. So. Head out here if anyone wants a book. Yeah.
I want to, before you, I do want to thank Mark for his great talk, but also to recognize the Department of Arkansas Heritage. I think DAH is indeed a national leader for state history, and the work they've done is truly visionary, not just in the sesquicentennial work. I think Mark was trying not to brag too much, but I think he did give you at least a suggestion that Arkansas really has been a national leader in this respect. And DAH deserves a ton of credit, and we're grateful for their work. This book that he's getting ready to sign was published by Butler Center Books, and Rod Lorenzen there in the doorway is the manager of that for the Butler Center. And we also have some other books about the Civil War, and all of our books are available. The University of Arkansas Press distributes our books. So if you go on their website, the UA Press website, you can order our books, or you can buy a lot of them in the Cox Creative Center on the other side of the parking lot from the main library here on the main library campus. And we'll be able to help. And now we're going to have a drawing. And by the way, the notorious Paul Austin, an Imboden alum, and his partner 2 seats over from Williford, Mike Colson. That's where that Williford Imboden thing is. Some of you might not have known. They do this often. They work it into just about every conversation, no matter what the topic is. They'll figure out a way to get the Williford Imboden rivalry. And now we're going to give away one of Mark's books.